making positive expectation trades, that the trading that you're doing should lead to good outcomes, but there's a lot of noise in it, right? There are lots of times where you can make the right decision and lose. There's also times where you can make the wrong decision and win, that you can have good outcomes even though you should not have had the position on that you had on. The way a star behaves has nothing to do with whether or not we're observing it. But for a trader, the way a stock moves has everything to do with our perception of the way that stock should move. Once we have an opinion about it, we then go out and do something differently, and somebody else can see what we did, and they're building that into their system and their model of the way the world moves. So dealing with this constant change, I think, is the biggest surprise, especially since we're bringing in really high-level smart people, right? We're not bringing in people who are used to being wrong, and we're putting them in a world where they're going to be wrong a lot. Having the right mindset to say, this I think is correct for now, but it might not be correct tomorrow, is a new experience for a lot of these people, again, who are accustomed to being A+ students, to getting things right. And we're putting them in a world where they're not getting a lot right. We are really, really good when somebody else tells us what they're thinking about at seeing where the holes are, right? We're really good at saying, well, gosh, you certainly weren't thinking about this important aspect, or, you're in the language of biases and heuristics, you're getting anchored, or this sounds a lot like hindsight bias, or whatever it might be. We're really bad at doing that analysis on ourselves. And one of the students, and this is the game that I've played most often in casinos, by the way. So I've played most of my real hours putting my capital at risk in this game, which means I've really had a reason to think through how to do this well. And the student said, okay, like I've played a little Hold'em before. Now that you're teaching against this game, I guess it'll probably take a session or two before we're as good as you are. So there's a chance that that's true. You might be right about that, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to keep my edge for a long, long time, because there's so much in here that you don't even understand matters. This is the Dunning-Kruger problem, right? Because you know so little about this, you don't even know how much you have to learn about.
Welcome to the Alpha Mind podcast, hosted by Mark Randall and Stephen Goldstein, and sponsored by the Society of Technical Analysts, the STA, the world's leading body for the advancement of price action and market timing education. In this episode, we were honoured to sit down and talk to Todd Simkin, an Associate Director at Susquehanna International Group, SIG, one of the world's most respected trading firms, which is headquartered in Philadelphia. Todd has been a trader himself for Susquehanna and has played an integral role in the development of their superb firm-wide trader development program. Todd has some fascinating and well thought out views about challenges facing traders in relation to behaviour, decision making, and the development of the key skills and abilities needed to thrive in a world characterised by heightened uncertainty. We were captivated by the depth of Todd's wisdom and the clarity with which he shared some relatively complex themes, and we feel you will be too. Before we get into the podcast, long-term listeners to the Alpha Mind podcast will be aware that we have a very highly valued partnership with the Society of Technical Analysts, who are a globally renowned education institution that has been at the forefront of helping traders, analysts and system developers hone their technical analysis skills for over half a century. Thanks to this collaboration, we are thrilled to extend an exclusive benefit to our listeners, who can obtain a £100 discount or its equivalent in your local currency on their superb Technical Analyst Home Study course. This comprehensive course has an option for an internationally recognised diploma and has been created by some of the leading experts in the fields of technical analysis. The course is designed to profoundly enhance your skills and knowledge and delves into a wide array of price action techniques, methods and aspects. The knowledge can prove invaluable to traders, investors, analysts, quants and system developers, offering fresh perspectives for deciphering and interpreting price action, sentiment, liquidity and many of the aspects around those, including the underlying human behaviour which goes into these aspects. You can visit our website at alpha-mind.net and scroll down to the Society of Technical Analysts section to find a link with more detail how to take advantage of this offer. Now on with the podcast.
Well, a very warm welcome to this week's Alpha Mind podcast. We're delighted to have Todd Simkin with us. Todd, at the start of his career, a Philadelphia Stock Exchange floor trader and very options-rich market from my own knowledge of that. And through 25 years of experiences, over that, most of the time in Susquehanna, and is now Associate Director of Susquehanna, holding a variety of roles, including, and I think this is really important for the drift of the content of the podcast, is responsibility for firm-wide education and trader development of the trading teams. So Todd, welcome to the show, and perhaps starting off in those long off days of the Philadelphia pits, that must have gave you a real good base to start to drive your career forward from. Perhaps tell us a story of you across that period of time till the present day.
Yeah, well, first, thank you guys for having me. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. So my time starting on the floor of the Philadelphia Stock Exchange looked very different than what trading looks like today. And I feel like I'm giving a history lesson and talking about the days when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But it was a unique opportunity to learn trading in a very hands-on way, that you were very much part of the mechanical aspect of the trade. So not only were you making the decisions about risk allocation and where you would want to buy or sell these derivative assets, but you were also physically writing and circling tickets that were then getting stapled together with the trade on the other side and dropped through a physical slot where a key puncher would put the trade into a system, and eventually it would show up on an electronic report so that other people could see the trade. But you were at the touch point of where the buy met the sell, where the two people agreed to this risk transfer for some amount of money. And I think that for me, that's really helped now that we're in this electronic environment where trades are instantaneous and happen at faster than human speed. So the machines are meeting machines, and there is no longer somebody pulling out a stack of tickets and circling September and writing in the strike price to consummate a trade. But the underpinnings of the agreement to risk exchange for a certain amount of money are the same as they were when I was on the floor of an exchange, when I had to wait for a broker to walk in and represent an order and then shout buy or sell and have the trade match up. That's still what's happening today. It's just happening in a different modality. And understanding how we got from the open outcry, very high touch aspect of trading to where we are today with a very low touch, electronic, anonymous connection between people, I think has helped us teach our traders that what they're really doing is still agreeing with somebody else, that whether or not it feels like a negotiation, there is sort of an implicit negotiation around pricing that then leads to a trade, which, like I said, is this risk transfer, which is ultimately the service that financial markets provide. Right? We're not just doing this because it's a fun game, although it is a very fun game. We're doing it because ultimately it supports a very important function in the capital markets, which is to allow the person who can best stomach risk, either because of diversification or because of the offsetting risk that they have in other areas, to price it appropriately, and somebody who does not want to hold risk to be able to sell it and reduce their exposure. So that transition from where I started on the floor to where things are today in electronic markets, I think is very similar to the experience that the markets in general have, and the way we train people to think about that risk transfer mechanism.
And do you sense that the pressures changed at all? Do you think it's become easier to make these decisions in the world we're in now, or do you think it was easier back when you could actually in a tactile way be part of the flow?
Yeah, I love the idea of easiness here, because it's not real clear what's easy, right? It is certainly easier to affect a trade right now, right? It is not difficult at all for me to put my hands on a keyboard and within seconds have executed a very large quantity trade that doesn't go through as many checks and balances as it may have in an open outcry market. So it's very easy for me to trade right now. The other thing that's easier now is that there's I feel like better access to cleaned data. So not just sources of data. Not only do we have more sources of data now, but we have better processes and better and a better ability to filter that data to show us what we want to see and filter out all the noise that we don't want to see to make a decision. That said, I think that in the open outcry world, there were other things that were a lot easier there. For one thing, because of physical constraints, I could only stand in front of a pit that had, say, 20 different names traded there. And as much as I might be interested in other securities that were traded around the corner or in a different pit, I just couldn't be in two places at once. And the only thing I could do was know those 20 names intimately, know them in and out, and be entirely familiar with the story behind them, and know where I wanted to position myself in terms of forward volatility or delta or whatever it might be. Now it's a whole lot harder because I have access to 5,000 names, right? I could trade anything from the exact same system that I'm sitting in front of. Even if I wanted to concentrate on one name or 5,000, everything looks the same for me in terms of setup and access. So some of those things, which I think is incredibly intimidating, by the way. I think being able to trade 5,000 names means you probably shouldn't, but being able to figure out what you should be looking at is a much harder problem now than it was when I was trading on the floor.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you. Listen, can I just perhaps maybe just sort of reset this conversation back to perhaps starting with your own journey from, how you got into trading to begin with, those early experiences which you talked about, to kind of where you are now. What was your evolution as a trader? What was your evolution of your philosophy, which we're going to explore a little bit as we go through this?
Yeah, and I think I will start before I started trading with my education, because it is unconventional for the path of a trader. So a lot of the traders, in particular that we hire, our approach is very quantitative and analytical. So we tend to hire people with quantitative and analytical backgrounds. People from finance, certainly, but also physics, applied mathematics, computer science. All of those people tend to do well in our system of trading. That said, I was an interdisciplinary major as an undergraduate, where I studied a combination of anthropology, psychology, linguistics, and education.
Wow.
So I created my own major while I was in college that focused on deaf culture and language, so American Sign Language and the deaf communities, and the way deaf students are taught. So I was working as a sign language interpreter while I was in college and teaching an American Sign Language class, and did not have any aspirations of moving into trading.
Okay.
As I was graduating from college, I figured I needed to do something. I needed to find a way to use my skills, and I looked into education. So I thought about working as an educator in schools for the deaf, but didn't know that would be fulfilling for me for the long term. So I considered a bunch of other paths as well. And as I was thinking, well, I should probably get something that pays me, let me look at the jobs that are available for somebody with my unique background. And the opportunities that presented themselves were things like consulting, which as the more I dug into consulting, the more I thought, I don't know how I, without any business experience, could give other companies advice on how they should run their business. So that didn't feel like a great fit for me. I applied to law school and got a scholarship to law school. And I thought that's a pretty reasonable skill set to fall back on, and maybe I'll do that. But as I was looking at it, I also met a specialist on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And I was visiting a friend of my father's who was a broker on the floor of the stock exchange. And the more I saw about stock brokerage, the more I was sure that this was not the right role for me. It felt like a sales job where I did not fully understand the product I'd be selling. I just didn't love brokerage. But then when I started speaking to the specialist, it was a role that I didn't even know existed. And he was talking about making capital allocation decisions with imperfect information, and the fact that they were providing two-sided markets. I thought that sounded fascinating. And the more I looked into that, the more excited I got about finance, and thought this is something I could give it a shot. And he then also introduced me to the concept of derivatives. And one of the big differences between the stock market game and the derivatives game was the positive sum or non-zero sum nature of stock trading versus the zero sum nature of derivatives trading. That whatever one person won in derivatives trading, somebody else lost, which really appealed to me as a competitive person, as a gamer, as a former athlete. That sounded like an attractive world to be in, because it would be, regularly stimulating, where I was surrounded by other smart people that were also trying to figure out the best way to achieve their goals. And their goals, like I said, are zero sum. So that felt exciting to me, and that's what led me to apply to, and then thankfully receive a job with SIG. And I've been with Susquehanna from the start of my career. So I know at the start you said most of the career has been spent at Susquehanna. A small tweak to that, which is that it's been from the first day working in finance. I've been working for the same group.
But your role has evolved, hasn't it? You've been through quite a few different versions of yourself. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So I started off, like I said, on the floor of the Philadelphia Stock Exchange, trading equity options. I started off as an assistant, where I hopped around helping a couple of our different senior traders. There was one woman I was trading, or I was assisting one of our traders I was working for, who I still credit with the bulk of my education in how to trade. It's sort of like when you're learning to drive. It doesn't matter how many times you read the manual. You have to get behind the wheel in order to understand what you're actually doing. In the same way, this trader that I was working for did a really good job of not only talking to me about the theory and the expectations behind our models and how our theoretical pricing worked, but really got me to understand the nuanced aspects of being in the driver's seat, of really trading and making the decisions about allocating capital under conditions of uncertainty, where you actually have to do it, right? You actually have to put money at risk and then check your results. So I worked as an assistant, and then I returned to the floor to trade options on Dell, DELL, the computer company, which at the time that I joined the crowd was the most actively traded equity option in the U.S. So it was a very busy place to learn, which was wonderful for me. It was a lot of opportunity to a lot of repetitions at making trading decisions, which was great. And then pretty soon after I started trading on the floor, an opportunity came up to trade in an upstairs trading environment. So off of the floor on one of our trading desks to trade American depositary receipts. So this is an international equity arbitrage. American depositary receipts are receipts held by a depositary bank on a common stock listed in another country. So, Deutsche Telekom is listed on the German exchanges, and then the Bank of New York owns a big block of that stock and sells receipts on that on the New York Stock Exchange. So there's an arbitrage relationship between them, where if you can buy Deutsche Telekom at one price in the US, sell it at another price in Germany, then, and you can see what the equivalent price will be, you can capture the difference in those prices. But of course, the only way to capture the differences in those prices is to then also lock in the currency exchange, because when you buy in the US, you're paying out dollars. When you sell it in Germany, you're receiving, well, now euros. At the time I was trading in Deutschmarks, but so you end up with currency exposure that you can then trade out of by trading the underlying currency. So I traded this arbitrage, or I traded these trades which were driven by this arbitrage relationship, which does not necessarily mean that we always traded the arbitrage. We actually frequently had positions for various reasons. And around that time, we were opening up our operations in Dublin, Ireland. So I moved to Europe to help set up that operation, continued trading the ADR trade for some time, but also started our single stock derivatives desk while I was in Europe. Also traded a bunch of products that were, I would say, more quantitative in nature. So I worked very closely with our quantitative researchers to understand how best to model non-traditional products that were traded. Again, mostly in Europe, a lot in France and a lot in Germany at the time. And then after some time trading in Europe, I was asked to move back to the US, to move from the trading side to the business side and help oversee our global business development, our recruiting efforts, our training efforts, all of the matters related to personnel, so compensation, personnel moves, things like that, and worked really closely with our general operating officer and chief operating officer to help run the day-to-day business.
Mm-hmm.
And it was important for the management that the people running the day-to-day business understood trading, understood the way we talk about risk, understood the way we talk about expectation and outcomes, because it would be really bad if the person making compensation decisions didn't understand the difference between somebody who was making 3 big bets a year that either paid off a lot or had a big loss, but still had some expectation, versus someone else who's making 1,000 bets a day that were all small and cumulative in time, and therefore the variance of those bets would wash out a lot more over time. So I was in that role for some time until we saw a lot of risk accumulating in our fixed income business. So I think a lot of people know the story of 2007 into 2008 and the financial crisis. And a lot of that was a crisis around fixed income and the decoupling of the fixed income securities from their derivatives. That there was this big break between the two, which ended up leading to massive capital calls, which ended up leading to people having to liquidate other positions. And that was a big part of the story behind the financial crisis. So around that time, I moved in to oversee our fixed income trading at the firm.
Right.
In order to, again, bring the decision processes that we had in other areas into that part of the trading world.
So what is your role today? How would you describe your role today?
Yeah. So after getting our fixed income world stabilized and getting a new person in the head of fixed income seat that really understood the trading there very well and the risk very well, I moved back to the administrative side of the business to co-run our education and recruiting programs. So I taught all of our junior traders, along with my colleagues, I taught them the basics of derivative valuation and pricing, option risk, some game theory and decision science, and how we apply that to trading. We spend a lot of time playing games, things like poker, to model this risk transfer that happens in a trading environment. But ultimately, the most important thing that we do on the education side is mock trade. So we put them in the exact same position that they would be in as traders, and they're making the same types of decisions just without any capital at risk.
Right.
So I did that for about a decade, and that was a big part of my contribution, I think, to the growth of the firm. Currently, I am overseeing a new business venture for us. So we have moved into reinsurance. So we have a Bermuda-based reinsurance company, and I'm the CEO of that group, in addition to looking at some U.S. insurance brokerage, which we're developing currently.
Right. Okay. And I think one of the themes that because you spend a lot of time with educating traders. I know you're very passionate about that, and you've got some really well-developed thoughts about that. And one of the angles that we work on when we do these podcasts, and that we do it ourselves in our own work, is trying to help people improve their performance in what is quite a crazy, insane job most of the time. It's dealing with uncertainty, dealing with complexity, dealing with a lack of knowledge of what's really happening out there sometimes, and this sort of randomness that sort of we or people as traders are just sitting in the middle of, trying to make sense of. And I know that's something you're passionate about. You've talked about the idea that traders are not born, they're made. So I guess we just want to hear, a little bit about where that came from, what your ideas about that are, what your philosophy is, and how, what are the principles you apply that tries to help traders become made, in a sense.
Yeah. So that's very much something that we as a company have as part of our cultural fabric. I want to be clear that this was not my addition to the approach that the firm took, but very much from day one, the way the firm saw training and the ability to find smart people. And if you have smart people, you can teach them the fundamentals of trading. So understanding what that looks like really requires you to understand what we think it is to be a good trader. And being a good trader means that you are doing a good job of making positive expectancy decisions. So you're making decisions that in the long run should work out so that they have a better return than not. And in order to do that, you have to understand both the structurally sort of what the products are, but you also have to understand the information embedded in the trades that people want to do. The understanding structurally what the trades are is a very easy thing, right? Well, I take that back. It's a difficult thing, but it is a very straightforward thing to be able to teach. That I can teach you what a put option is, that it is the right but not the obligation to sell a certain security at some time in the future as at a given price, and then I can teach you mechanically how to go about pricing that. This is what you would find in a finance textbook, right? If you were to buy the John Hull options and derivatives book, this is what you'll get out of that. Is functionally what are these products? What are these risk products that you're trading? But that doesn't teach you the more important part of what we think goes into this, which is how do you make decisions about where you want to buy and where you want to sell? That you are trading some version of future truth, right? You are trying to position yourself so that if some outcomes arise, that you're in a position to win to that you're making positive expectation trades, that the trading that you're doing should lead to good outcomes, but there's a lot of noise in it, right? There are lots of times where you can make the right decision and lose. There's also times where you can make the wrong decision and win, that you can have good outcomes even though you should not have had the position on that you had on. So being able to decouple the outcome from the decision is an important part of the trading approach, or the training approach that we have to trading, so that we can then talk about the decision process separate from the outcome. In the long run, with enough plays, with enough exposures, the outcome is going to look a lot like the expectation of the outcome, right? That's the law of large numbers, is that if you're making enough of these decisions that have some type of positive expectation, then you're going to realize that positive expectation. Likewise, if you're making mistakes over and over again, you're going to end up bleeding out that money over time, and you're going to see that in your results, that your results are going to be negative because your decisions were negative. But looking at each individual decision, you're going to have a lot of times where you made the right choice, where you made a great decision, where you were 60% to win. So 60% to win is only 40% of the time do you lose. Well, that happens a lot. That's still 40% of your days are constitute a good chunk of your year, right? There are going to be lots of days where if you're making that fantastic decision, that you're going to end up with losers over and over again. And being able to appropriately look at the decision process is as separate from that outcome is where we spend a lot of our time, and that leads us to talking about heuristics and biases. It leads us to talk about naturalistic decision making, which I know is something that you've talked about before on your show. That we're looking at how risk actually gets priced appropriately in the marketplace, and we can't tell that only by looking at one outcome or even a handful of outcomes.
Interesting. No, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's like we say, we talk about it's like it's easy language. There's a whole different language spectrum that goes with these, with the whole education. It's teaching people the language that goes with the fact that there's this learning. I'm very interested to understand that from your experience with these cohorts of traders that are going through this experience within the business. What aspect of trading do the students, as perhaps we call them, what do they have most difficulty with? Is it the entry? Is it the exit? It's the once the risk is on. There's the turmoil. What's proved to be most difficult for them to cope with?
I think the most difficult aspect, not just for our students, but for our experienced traders as well, is handling that noisy outcome, handling the noise that comes after the fact. I mentioned before, the types of people that we tend to hire are people from computer science or physics or finance backgrounds, among, thankfully, people with deaf culture and language majors. But a lot of those people come from places where ultimately, if you can figure out a system, then you've defined it and you can move forward. Biologists are very much in this camp, right? If you can describe the way biological systems interact, no matter how complex they are, once you've described them, then you can just build on that, and you've got a description of an underlying process. Germ theory comes. Once germ theory is developed, everything that you can sort of bolt onto germ theory ends up being correct, because germ theory itself is a good underlying description of the interaction of these of germs and health, right? But in our world, once you've figured out the way a system works, it's going to change the way you behave. And once you behave differently, the system itself changes fundamentally. So we are in this world of constant change, and part of the change is our own impact on it, right? For astrophysicists, the way a star behaves has nothing to do with whether or not we're observing it. But for a trader, the way a stock moves has everything to do with our perception of the way that stock should move. Once we have an opinion about it, we then go out and do something differently, and somebody else can see what we did, and they're building that into their system and their model of the way the world works. So dealing with this constant change, I think, is the biggest surprise, especially since we're bringing in really high-level smart people, right? We're not bringing in people who are used to being wrong, and we're putting them in a world where they're going to be wrong a lot, and not wrong necessarily in the direction of the trades that they make, but certainly wrong in terms, if they only evaluate it on the outcome, but even wrong in terms of having to change their mind frequently, and being open and willing to change your mind, and having the right mindset to say, this I think is correct for now, but it might not be correct tomorrow, is a new experience for a lot of these people, again, who are accustomed to being A+ students, to getting things right, and we're putting them in a world where they're not getting a lot right all the time.
We're going to return to this fascinating podcast shortly. First, we want to tell you a little bit about ourselves at Alpha Mind, where we strongly advocate for the principle that the most valuable investment a trader can make is the one they make in themselves. And for businesses, it's the ones they make in developing their people and their talent. Our services are centered around trader performance coaching, leadership and executive coaching, team coaching, and our impactful high-performance trading workshop programs. If you're keen to learn more about our work and how we can assist you or your business, we invite you to explore our offerings at alpha-mind.net or reach out to us at info@alpha-mind.net. Now let's get back to this fascinating podcast. So how are you helping those students to adjust in that situation and context you described? Because it sounds like you're talking about a very reflexive experience is what's happening for a lot of them.
There are a few ways that we do this. One, like I said, one of the major things that we do is eventually get them to the point where they're mock trading. So where they're making decisions where they're not actually putting capital at risk. And we get to really talk about both the information available and the decision that was made, and the way more experienced people would make that same decision. So we surround them with experienced senior traders as they're mock trading, and they might say, somebody came in to sell this asset, so I moved the price down because I want to make sure that I'm balancing supply and demand. We could say, okay, but look at it in the context of all of these other things that are happening at the same time. Even though that seller came in, that is inconsistent with the rest of the fabric of the trading that we've seen up to now. This is actually a good time to say that these pieces of information are mutually exclusive. Here's a time where you could take a position and comfortably know that you'd be able to trade out of that risk through the other opportunities that are present in the market. You don't have to necessarily move out of the way. And in fact, if you do, somebody else is going to step in and fill in that liquidity because of the rest of this picture. So we get to have the modeling of the senior trader and their thought process articulated for the junior traders so that they can hear how they might be thinking about a problem incorrectly. The other thing that we're doing that's helping is really not just encouraging, but really forcing communication. That one of the approaches that I've always taken is informed by a educational philosopher named Lev Vygotsky. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lev Vygotsky, but one of the philosophical educational principles that Vygotsky had is this idea of the more informed other. That if you can, and Vygotsky really focused on child development and the development of education at the earlier stages, but I was really thinking about it in the exact same context and later stages. And you mentioned before zone of proximal development, that if you can get somebody into an area where they're not quite comfortable with the decisions that they're making, they don't really know what they're doing, but they can get there with some help. That's where you want to put them in order to get to this educational experience that you're talking about. That's where they're going to feel the discomfort of not having the security in being in their zone of mastery, the area that where they know everything very well. But instead, they're in this area where, with some push, with some help from a more knowledgeable mentor, they can end up applying things that they've seen in other contexts to this new context and feel more comfortable that the approach that they're taking is the appropriate one. That's why we have these senior people in the room with them as they are learning to trade. We don't just want them up against the system trying to develop their own approaches, because frequently that's going to lead to bad habits that develop that they don't even realize are bad habits, because it works in a small context but not in a broader context. Instead, we want them to develop a thought process, an underlying approach that they can apply to these contexts that's informed by the experience of more seasoned traders and their own personal experience as well, right? So that they get to marry the information that they can glean from the market with an approach to how to think about new information and how to think about things like paradigm shifts in the marketplace, anything that could be programmed into an algorithm, we want to program into an algorithm, right? We know that their algorithms are going to be more consistent. They're going to apply principles consistently and appropriately given all the information available to them. But we also know that they're going to be wrong because they're not going to be able to take in the totality of the quality of the information that they're getting or the volume or whatever it might be. And that's where we need people sitting in the seats to make decisions and figure out when to change the parameters behind those systems, when to take a different approach in the market.
Here's a question for you. So in terms of if you were to pick sort of a bunch of what you would consider ideal candidates to go through a training program. Okay, you've mentioned that smart is important. I get it. But are there any other qualities or ingredients to them that you think actually, if you had these attributes, actually you would have a very, very good chance of actually not just going through the program, but coming out of it flourishing? Do you have a sense of what they may look like?
Yes. This is something we've given a lot of thought to and have had tons of conversations around. And if I'm talking about an individual, I will say that there is a a combination of the three legs of the stool are strong quantitative and analytical skills, which is orthogonal to strong interpersonal skills. So not negatively correlated with, but uncorrelated with. So we're looking for people who are strong on sort of both of these dimensions. So quantitative and analytical skills, interpersonal skills, so the ability to communicate with others, whether that's brokers in terms of being able to create a relationship where you're developing order flow, or really also with their peers in the trading world, so they can talk about, so they can learn from others and teach others, which is an important part of our culture. And then the third dimension, which feels a lot like it could be a combination of the other two, but I think it isn't a separate skill. The third dimension is gambling skills. So once you have the information about what is a fair value and are able to draw the order out of the market, are you appropriately taking risk? Are you able to identify what risk looks like, and are you taking it in the right way? So the individual that we're looking for is sort of a high performer on all of those dimensions, and we have found that being a super high performer on one dimension does not make up for low quality on the other two dimensions. That we have found people who are great gamblers, but just have terrible interpersonal skills, and they don't do well with us in the long run. We found people who are incredibly analytical, and they are wonderful at things like quantitative research, but then they can't pull the trigger when it comes time to actually put money at risk in the trading market. So their gambling skills are low, but their math skills are high. That's not good. That doesn't work. And it's because they end up not trading. So figuring out the right balance between those three legs ends up being pretty important for us.
So, that's really struck a chord with me, because it's and I've spoken about this on podcasts before. But if I go back to my trading career, which was I think close to 25 years, I was working in the investment banking world. But I would probably, you would have described me more as a prop trader, more of a position taker, rather than someone who traded flow. Perhaps in the early days, I was a flow guy. I was doing a lot more arbitrage. But in my latter years, I moved to this more directional aspect. But I kind of had a bit of a crisis of confidence roughly halfway through my career. I would say I lost my way a little bit. And those three things which you talked about there. So I was very strong analytically. Okay, I wouldn't necessarily say quantitatively, but I could look at a market, I could analyze markets, I could bring together lots of research, my own intuitive sense of what was happening, my own analysis using technicals and the fundamentals, and I could construct a story and find value in the market. I had strong interpersonal skills. I communicated a lot with other people. I talked with brokers regularly. I talked with other traders. So I think I had 2 out of 3. But at this halfway stage of my career, and it was actually going through a process with a coach that made me realize that I wasn't a good risk taker. Okay, I'd been okay to a point. Obviously, I'd been sitting on a prop desk at a major investment bank. But it occurred to me that I wasn't good at taking risk. And at that point in my career, I wouldn't say I reinvented myself, but I suddenly realized, Steve, you're not going to last much longer unless you can develop your risk-taking piece. And I had to develop that in line with my personality. We've all got different risk personalities. So I was never going to be the big guy who took a huge position for 6 months, but I did have and find a way of taking risk that suited who I was and suited my philosophy, to taking risks and looking at markets and really enabling me to monetize the value that I was pretty good at finding. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head. There are those 3 areas, but they're all mutually exclusive. If you're good at 2 of them, you can probably develop the other one. That's what I believe. So it's interesting when you said on the interview we heard you had was the one with Shane Parrish of the Knowledge Project, and I think you said in that, traders are made, not born. And is that still something you subscribe to?
Absolutely. And one of the things that you just said that I wanted to follow up on was that you said that you needed to develop your risk taking. That what you didn't say, importantly, was that you needed to go take more risk, right? It wasn't the action that you needed to do; it was the education that mattered, right? You needed to work on it and think about it differently, or think about it more completely. One of the things that I see frequently from the outside, talking to non-traders, talking to non-finance people about our role, is they say, man, what you're doing looks really risky. And what they mean frequently is what you're doing looks really reckless, right? They do not make a distinction between measured risk and the ability to see where you're taking appropriate risk for the amount of capital that you have or the amount of information available in the market, versus saying you're doing something that is going to have a big outcome one way or another. That's risky. But I can take tons of positions that look risky that are really just reckless, right? That really just means I haven't given anything enough thought, and therefore this is not a smart risk for me to take. Or likewise, I could take positions that have huge outcomes, bigger outcomes than what we would normally see, but it's because I've got much better research and much better information and much better handle on what the risk looks like and where I can offset that risk with hedges, or where I've already naturally offset that risk with other positions that we have. And then I'm not doing something that's reckless. In fact, I'm doing something that is reducing our risk of ruin, that is better for us, but it looks riskier to people who don't understand that underlying concept. And being able to talk through that with somebody and develop their education around that, I firmly believe that I can get anybody to understand it if you give me enough time with them, and I can really talk through different examples and different scenarios with them. And that's exactly what our approach is to developing traders, as opposed to looking for natural born traders. I don't need somebody who comes in, Wild West style, slinging their guns, ready to take on gigantic risks where they don't have good underlying information. That's reckless. That's not what I want. But I can take somebody who is not inclined to put on risky positions and explain why this ends up working out best in the long run, and get them to feel that this is not a risky endeavor just because they take on a position that has volatility, but in fact has positive expectancy, and we can talk through the appropriate balance. So I believe that on any of those three dimensions, on the risk taking, on the quantitative and analytical skills, and on the interpersonal skills, that with training, anybody can get to an appropriate point where they're able to do a good job of this. We as a firm are very big subscribers to the growth mindset, right? Yes. That nobody comes in with a fixed set of characteristics, but instead, in a very much Carol Dweck type way. Carol Dweck, the educator who really focuses on has brought the term growth mindset into common parlance. That if you have the idea that people can be different later than they are now, which seems on its surface like who could possibly disagree with that? But once you accept that, then you can say, okay, well, then I can teach people how to do something that they're not necessarily comfortable doing today. Whether that's taking risk, whether that is getting better educated in the underlying quantitative models, or even if that's on how to interact better interpersonally with other people.
Can I just go a little bit deeper onto the interpersonal question? Because I can kind of understand quant education. And I can kind of understand gambling skills education and the poker stuff and the practice marketplaces you can create for people to interact with. But what are you doing around the interpersonal? What does that teaching look like, and what aspects do you really focus upon?
Yeah. So as part of our education program, there are two aspects of that I think really come through. One is communicating with brokers or with outside the firm, communicating with people who are not part of your team, right? So I don't want to say adversarial communications because I firmly believe that every negotiation is collaborative and not collaborative and cooperative, because otherwise you don't reach an agreement, right? But with people who do not necessarily have the same aligned interests that you have, that's one form of communication that I'm talking about. And then the other is with people who are aligned with you, who do have the same goals and are internal to the team. And the way we do this is, again, by modeling it in our mock trading environment, where we are acting as external brokers or external sources of order flow, and bringing orders to the to our junior traders, where they have to interact with it and think about how their communications impact whether or not they're going to get the trade, or whether or not they're going to get additional information about the trade, whatever it might be. And we stop and talk a lot about how to have those types of communications. And the other piece, which I think is actually the more important piece, is really encouraging and forcing people to talk frequently about their thought process. That we are really, really good when somebody else tells us what they're thinking about at seeing where the holes are, right? We're really good at saying, well, gosh, you certainly weren't thinking about this important aspect, or, you're in the language of biases and heuristics, you're getting anchored, or this sounds a lot like hindsight bias, or whatever it might be. We're really bad at doing that analysis on ourselves, right? We're really bad at when we're going through a thought process of recognizing, right now I'm falling into the trap of confirmation bias. So if we can really encourage people to say their thoughts out loud, talk about their thought process, then somebody else can say, Mark, that sounds a lot like you're falling into the trap of confirmation bias. And once we have the common language around what these biases look like, you can say, oh gosh, yeah, no, I can see that now. I think you're right. And maybe I should start thinking about this in a different way. And again, that's done by modeling. So in this Vygotskian way of having better mentors that are able to show you how to do this. But it's, again, also very much part of the culture that we are in, that people are sitting on a trading desk where all day long they're hearing people around them talk about why they are making the changes that they're making to the models, and somebody else gets to challenge them on it. And nobody is ever feeling like they are being personally challenged, because we all have the same goal, which is finding truth. That there's some ground truth that we're looking to effectively uncover when we're entering trades. If we knew the future state of the world, trading would be super easy. And as we approach that task of trying to find that truth, we get to attack ideas violently, because we're not attacking the people who have those ideas. Those people have the same goals that we do. They want to attack their ideas also because the goal is the same, which is to end up uncovering truth. So we've created a culture where it's totally appropriate to challenge what somebody else thinks, whether that person is the junior trader who's been on the desk for 4 days, or the founder of the firm who's been at the helm for 40 years. Either way, it's totally appropriate to say, that doesn't sound right to me, and here's why. And it's okay if you're wrong in your criticism, but by encouraging this communication, we end up doing a better job of getting toward that truth.
I'm laughing because I wish I'd have known this a few months ago. I've this is a chance for me to do a little plug as well. I've got a book coming out in January. It's called Mastering the Mental Game of Trading. And we're both, our business, Alpha Mind, we're big advocates for performance development, managing yourself better through the trade, being more structured, having a process, seeing the risk process as something far more than just, finding value or finding an idea, but actually, improving how you execute it and monetize it, which of course there's so many different aspects to it, including, realizing the reflexivity within markets. But I'm aware the industry does a really bad job of this. It does a really bad job of educating people in trading. There's still, through, I think, 99% of the industry, this kind of sink or swim mentality. You either have it or you don't. Right. One of the reasons why I was laughing is I've written towards the end of it that I don't know any firms, perhaps other than Bridgewater, that put this real emphasis on developing their people constantly. And now I'm hearing you talk, and I'm thinking there is another firm. I apologise for you in the book. You should have, if I'd have known that, Susquehanna would have been in there. But it sounds like this is really it's a big part of your secret sauce.
Maybe there's an opportunity to put us in the errata of the book, the addenda, or a new footnote, which is just one more small version. But it is, it is. I think yeah, perfect. Right, we'll be in volume 2. I think that it is one of the fundamental strengths that we really have is this philosophical approach to thinking that traders can be made that forces us to say, if someone's not a good trader, it's not their fault, it's our fault. The burden lies on us to do a better job of training them. There's this is tangentially related, but hopefully I'll be able to bring it back. Are you familiar with the classic problem of the ball and the bat costing $1.10? Do you know this?
Yes, it's part of a lecture that I give.
I will. I'll state the entire problem so that your listeners can think along. But the question is: a ball and a bat cost $1.10 together, and the ball costs the bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? I'll pause here for a second so people can think about it. And the classic result of this is that people give a quick, intuitive answer that is incorrect. And the intuitive answer here that is incorrect is to say that the ball costs 10 cents. When in fact, that does not satisfy the criteria, because if the ball costs 10 cents, then the bat would cost $1 more than that, which would be $1.10, and the two together would cost $1.20, which is too much. We want them to be $1.10 together. Therefore, the ball must cost 5 cents. So far, so what, right? All we've said so far is that people answer intuitively, and there's not all that much that's all that interesting about it until you start digging deeper into it. So recently, just this past week, I saw the research come out. I'm not sure when the research was conducted, but Andrew Meyer and Shane Frederick went back and asked, I think it was 93 variations on this problem. And they had a bunch of different people that they were able to ask these variations to. So they had thousands of people in their sample, from Google surveys to Mechanical Turk to a couple different areas that they're able to look at this. And my favorite outcomes from this were, one, that they still found exactly what the original research found, which is that the majority of people give the intuitive answer and not the reflexive answer. But the more interesting pieces of information I saw was one variation. They said, the ball costs, or the bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Consider whether or not the ball could cost 5 cents. So they're prompting people with, take a beat here on reading this sentence and think about whether or not this could be the case. And in fact, that doubled the number of people that said 5 cents is the answer, but it only doubled it to 31% of respondents. The majority of people still got it wrong. But my favorite variation was another one where they asked the question in the same way, and then in bold underneath of it, it said, the answer to this question is 5 cents. On the blank below, write 5 cents. And that got 77% of people to write 5 cents as the answer, which means that even when you're told, here is the answer, this is what the right outcome should be, 23% of people still don't get it right. So coming back to, sort of how this feeds into what we're doing as traders is that there are some people that are in what Meyer and Frederick call the hopeless group, which is even when you tell them the truth, they just can't get it. They're just not going to believe it. They're just not going to share it. But there's a good number of people that are in this other group. I forget exactly what they called it in their research, but it's basically, if prompted, they can think about things in a better way, right? These are the people who, when said, think about whether or not 5 cents makes sense, are able to say, oh yeah, it does. Okay, I see that I made a leap there, but on prompting, with education, with help, I can get to the right answer. That's what our approach is in our education program, is making sure that we're giving people enough context that they can improve their decision process.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So I just very quickly, when I ask that question on I deliver a lecture every year on behavioural finance for the Society of Technical Analysts Diploma Program, which we used to deliver at London School of Economics before the COVID days, but now it's online. So we don't get a chance to ask this question and see people's reactions. But when I asked that question, I used to present evidence or data that said apparently less than half the students who were tested on that at MIT, Harvard, or Princeton got that question right. And the failure rate apparently at other universities was over 80%. And we give that as an example of overconfidence, over-reliance on intuition, which leads to these very simple errors. And there's a lot of other great examples of similar questions to this. It's almost so simple that you don't think about it is the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is very much describes a lot of trading, and a lot of really anything that takes years of expertise to develop. And I've heard you guys talk on your show before about the expertise of pilots and why they still use checklists and all kinds of other areas where expertise grows with time. I think back to one of the times when we were teaching poker to a new group of our students. And I've been playing poker for years and years. I've played tens of thousands of hours of poker at this point. And I've gotten pretty good at understanding a lot of what goes into the decision process behind how to bet a hand. And we were playing a variation of the game that this student had never seen before. So we were playing a game called Omaha High-Low, or Omaha 8 or Better. And I don't need to get into the rules other than to say, if you've played Hold'em before, you're going to have a lot of bad intuitions and bad heuristics that do not apply to Omaha. That Omaha, you start with 4 cards instead of 2 like you would in Hold'em. But and it's a high-low game, which means that the best high hand wins and the best low hand wins. There's a bunch of variations that go into this. And I was introducing it to these students for the first time. And one of the students, and this is the game that I've played most often in casinos, by the way. So I've played most of my real hours putting my capital at risk in this game, which means I've really had a reason to think through how to do this well. And the student said, okay, like I've played a little Hold'em before. Now that you're teaching against this game, I guess it'll probably take a session or two before we're as good as you are. So there's a chance that that's true. You might be right about that, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to keep my edge for a long, long time because there's so much in here that you don't even understand matters. But because this is the Dunning-Kruger problem, right? Because you know so little about this, you don't even know how much you have to learn about this. You can't even conceptualize of how little you know because you don't know enough to know how deficient your current skills are. And I'm not talking myself up as the greatest Omaha 8 player of all time. I'm just saying I'm pretty sure I'm better than somebody who's never played the game, which doesn't feel like too big of a brag, but still feels like a comfortable position to be in.
Yeah, it's fascinating how poker has so many lessons, and I think the important story is that one has to have a commitment of wanting to learn and to fail and then to learn and to go through the journey. That I think, as Steve said on some of his classic examples of, you can't just decide to go boxing and decide to jump into the ring with Tyson as your sort of, okay, I'm a boxer. You've got to go through the journey. You've got to take the scrapes, the hits, the failures, the pain. I guess the misery. There's something, misery creeps into to trading, and of course, you've shared the gambling skills as one of your 3 pillars, of course, and that in your particular world, poker line stat. But for the evolving world of gaming, gambling skills could mean something just slightly different to poker. I mean, I'm just putting it out there. Yes, the Gen Zs of this world may be looking at the numbers of gambling in a very different way to perhaps we've looked at in terms of what we go to see in a casino. And I think they may be benefits from understanding that world, as particularly we go into the world of algos and AI, and perhaps It's a world that we're starting to understand, but others that are more Gen Z are probably much more understanding of what that means than and accepting of it compared to ourselves. But yeah, this the concept of the unbalanced stall is fascinating, and how actually, yeah, you try to trade off an unbalanced stall, you're going to be falling off of it. It just it's a very interesting image of the need for balance. But I guess the need for tenacity as well, because if you're going to go on a journey that involved 40% failure, 60% success, then you need to be pretty tenacious to carry on that journey. And so the resilient side is important. So I guess in the interpersonal, you must also have sort of a work around resilience as well, and how people can also look at that. We talked at the very beginning about what's the most difficult part of the trader journey is dealing with the noise, be that a junior trader or a seasoned trader. But I guess when we go back to the sort of the principles of the interpersonal again, there must be things that you also look at to kind of give people perhaps a better chance of surviving that noise.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of it comes back to that communication and the ability to talk about, not just doing the postmortem, but also doing the premortem. Like talk about what things can go wrong, and then not being surprised when they do. One of the things that I've heard stand-up comedians talk about before is the fact that if you go to they're not always going to have success, right? There are times where they're just not going to click with the audience and they're going to bomb, even though they're telling the same jokes that were hilarious the night before, right? So it's the same joke delivered the same way. Some people just don't click with it. And they say, I've heard, that if you hear nobody laugh and then a few seconds later, like 4 people start cracking up, those 4 people are the comedian's friends who are laughing at them bombing. That there's this culture really appreciating the failure. It is hilarious that this thing that I know you do well is not going well for you tonight. That's so funny to me. In the same way, when we put on a big bet, when we have a trade where we think that we have a reason to take a position and it doesn't go well, we're not thrilled with it, right? It means that we lost money and we're unhappy about the outcome. But just recently, we had a position on in a security, and the trader who had the position on was very clear about why they put the position on, and it went terribly. It did not work out, and the reaction wasn't to sort of shamefully look away and not discuss it, but it was to laugh about it. People on the trading desk were having a big laugh, like, oh, I thought this was a sure thing. I thought that this is one that you wanted to bet big. Apparently this didn't work out so great, and having a culture that can openly address the failures as well as the successes and talk about it in a big way, then doesn't leave that person walking away hanging their head saying, man, I can't believe everybody was laughing at me for this terrible trade, but instead lets them join in and say, yeah, that was, again, our goal is not to always be right. It is to find better truth in the long run, and we can do that by attacking bad ideas or even good ideas that have bad outcomes. So it's modeled by the people around them, and there will still be people who are getting pretty upset when they have losing trades, even if they thought they made good decisions. That also keeps people looking for ways to improve in the long run. But there's definitely very much a culture of being accepting of bad outcomes, of laughing at on the nights that the stand-up comedian bombs.
Yeah, so humility is important.
Totally. Yeah. And humility leads to transparency, right? If I'm willing to accept that I could be wrong, then it's fine for me to talk about what I'm doing and have somebody point out where I was wrong. It's really, really dangerous if somebody is afraid to fail in front of their peers, because then they're more likely to hide their errors, and then their errors will compound. Either in a legal way, hide them, like just not talk about them, or in an illegal way and like not show our operations department what trade they did because it didn't work out for them and they're going to try to get it back. This is what led to the downfall, for example, of Barings Bank. I know that you guys spoke to Nick Leeson at one point. I think that this was the structural problem that ended up leading to the downfall of Barings, was just not being willing to say, whoops, I lost, made a bad decision, it went against me, and I've got to own that.
I'll tell you a very funny story about that very quickly. So at the time I was working at Credit Suisse, and one of my colleagues had left about a year earlier to go to Barings on the rates desk. He was doing the funding, managing the treasury book, and one of my futures brokers just came down the line and said, "You hearing about any issues going on with Barings in one of their Asian offices on the futures?" And I said, "No." And I said, "Look, let me just check out, because we've got a guy who works there." So I shouted over to my colleague, can you just check out with Danny about make sure everything's okay over there at Barings? So he gave Danny a ring. He said, "Danny, anything going on with you guys in the Asian futures?" And he said, "No, not as far as I know." And anyway, about 2 years later, we were out having a beer, and he told me he remembered that story. And he said, "You know what? The funniest thing happened about an hour later after I asked. I got called up to the chairman's office. No one ever goes up to the chairman's office, ever. Okay, he's on the top floor of this building in the city of London. And you just never meet him." And he said, I got asked to go out there, and the chairman just went to me, "You asked whether we had any problems in our Asian office. I just want to let you that, no, we don't have any problems." He said,
"Wow,
it should have occurred to me at that moment.
Yeah,
we got problems."
That is a very, it's rare that people point out that they've stuck their head in the sand and they do not want to pull it out. And that sounds exactly what happened there, right? That's like, we're not even going to look into it because I'm sure that it's fine. Yeah.
But it's just, that's, we talk about that lack of humility. We talk about often people who are willing to ask for help, people who are willing to put their hand up. Everyone needs help at some point. Everyone needs support at some point. I know a lot of the darkest moments in my career as a trader, I had someone around me who just kind of, in a metaphorical way, they put an arm around me. They said, "Look, don't worry about this. This is going to turn around. You're okay." And those moments were just so important. And I think that's part of a great trading room. It's almost like you have a band of brothers mentality around there at Susquehanna, from the learning, the development, the support, the whole way through that business.
Yeah. And actually, you just brought up something that reminded me that I felt I gave an incomplete answer before. When asked what type of person we would want to hire to be able to do well in this process, and I talked about the individual, and I didn't talk about the group. That what we end up hiring is not one person who's going to then do all of the trading for the firm, but we hire many people who are going to end up working together. And it's really important for me that we have diversity of thought in that group. You mentioned a band of brothers, and immediately my thought was, and sisters, right? Like that.
I'm in my head, I'm standing here going, "Damn, I should have said brothers and sisters," because it is so important to have that diversity within a group in many different forms and ways. So yes,
right. And I want different socioeconomic backgrounds. I want different ethnic backgrounds. I want different racial backgrounds, because all of this, I think, ends up doing exactly what we want to do, which is having different perspectives able to be articulated. And if we do a good job of creating the culture where everybody feels comfortable communicating and searching for truth, then people with different experience can ask different questions to help drive at that truth. So importantly for me, I want the individual to be strong on those three dimensions. I want the group to look different from each other, to make sure that we have a robust enough population that not everybody, that we don't fall subject to groupthink, because we don't have the same type of person brought up in the same type of environment with the same type of philosophy and the same type of culture. But instead, we end up able to challenge each other. The person that I spent most of my career working with is she was my co-head of education while I was in the education department. She's a wonderful trader, a wonderful person, and we have very different perspectives on a lot of the things that go into what we should be hiring for, and what's the best way to train people, and how often should we be doing summative versus formative testing, and kind of all these things that go into the evaluation and growth process. And part of the reason that we worked really well together for so long is because we had different thoughts on this. Yes. That if we had the same thought on this, we would be missing something very important. But because we thought about things differently, we were able to bounce off of each other, and through our friction, really create something that was better than what either of us could do on our own.
The opposite side of that is it usually ends in a car crash somewhere.
Totally.
So it's
really, really dangerous if you think you've got 6 different opinions, when what you really have is one opinion voiced by 6 different people in the exact same way. You think that you're doing more deep analysis than you are.
And you get totally caught up in the confirmation bias, the sort of cheering the news that is meaningless and ignoring the sort of really important news because it doesn't agree with you. The sort of and I think we've all seen those sort of disasters happening. So this feels really big at Susquehanna, this kind of diversity, gender diversity, socioeconomic diversity, and almost sort of allowing room for that to breathe as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is, again, I think part of our DNA is this idea that we value argument, and not argument for the sake of argument, but argument again for the sake of finding truth. Yeah. Let's really push on this a little bit to figure out how we could do it better.
Yeah.
We end up again having much deeper thoughts about certain areas of interest that collide in really beautiful ways in terms of our ability to then parlay all these different approaches and different thoughts into better trading ideas or technologies or models or whatever it might be. So it's very much a part of the fabric of Susquehanna.
Yeah.
Listen, Steve, I suppose it's time to start to wrap this up.
It is. But there was one question, which perhaps not a question. It was something which I heard again in your Shane Parrish podcast, and I loved it when you said it, and I made a note of it, and I just thought our audience need to hear it and hear your thoughts on it. Is where you said the answer to every trading question is it depends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I just wanted you maybe just to elaborate on that for our audience.
Yeah. So there's more information available than we're ever going to be able to access, right? We're never going to be able to process everything. And the right approach at one time might be the wrong approach at another time, given a slightly different set of circumstances. That where depends is, or the answer that the trade, what to do next depends on something, is a great start of a new line of questioning. What does it depend on? And in what ways should you change your answer depending on the information that you find? But if you stopped at, what should you do here? You should buy, 10,000 shares when this happens. It's like, okay, well, if I change the initial conditions just a little bit, I'm going to change the outcome dramatically. If I change the way you behave in this situation just a little bit, I'm going to change the way other people react to it. So there's no set answer. And to the extent that there is a set answer, machines are taking care of that before you've ever been able to even see the opportunity for the trade. So given that you're able to see a trade and make a trading decision, the right approach is going to depend on a lot of things. And all of those things are going to require analysis and reflection, right? And starting with, if you start at the point that your answer is going to depend on something, you're going to start asking those questions and get the right people to weigh in and the right information back. Another thing that's important is that very rarely is there one answer that is right in all cases. Just yesterday, I was sitting on the trading desk, and on the other side of the desk was one of our senior index traders, who I heard talking to one of his junior traders. I wrote down what he said because it was so great. and it's going to sound simple, it's silly that I'm even reading it, but it was, I'm not saying do this going forward. I'm saying try this for today. He was giving advice on something to do. And importantly, the point that he was making was, look, I'm not revamping the way we're going to approach trading forever, but I am saying run this test. Look at this as an opportunity to get feedback from the marketplace about what would happen differently if we do something differently. And sometimes that's going to cost us. We're not going to make as much money as we would have made if we had done it the way we did it before. But sometimes it's going to give us information that's going to allow us to grow in a new direction. So I'm not saying do this going forward. I'm saying try this for today. I think that phrase is probably an important phrase for traders. And that's the answer to it depends. Don't change what you do forever. Change what you do right now and see how that leads to a different impact and how that's going to change your participation in the market in some way.
Yeah, I think, I've thought of so many examples and, of how that worked. I mean, just one example many years ago is both, there was two of us trading on the desk on a rates business, and we had completely opposite views on the market. And over the next couple of weeks, we both made money. We're completely opposite views on the market because there's a million ways to express your views in the market. So that I just thought that's a great example of it depends, So I just thought that was just such an amazing statement.
Yeah, it's just been fascinating talking to Todd, and I guess giving Todd a bit of a platform to share the stuff that he's passionate about. And moving from trader to educator, and a sense of purpose about educating is really, really important, certainly to us as Steve and myself, educators to some extent, and what we do. And I guess that's the whole point of this podcast, really. It's thought leadership. It's talking about other people's stories and understanding from the biggest in the market just how they're calibrating their business and their assets, to make the most out of chaos, because we know it's chaos. I loved some of the points where, talk about your thoughts out loud and be open to the opinion of others, as one of your key pillars, because you talk about communication and you repeated just how important it was to communicate across the team and to be open to sharing these things, to debate your view, and maybe for others to pick out the fact you've got some biases in there that you may want to pay attention to in terms of your decision making. We laughed about it, but sort of laughing at your failures and the appropriate sense of what that word means, and having humility leading to transparency was also something that was very important for me. But I mean, ultimately, the whole sense of balance about these people that are coming through into this business, having the balance around the quantitative, the balance around the skills of trading itself, but the balance around self, and is critical. So, Todd, we thank you for going deep into that, and we enjoyed the journey. And just thanks.
That's been my absolute pleasure. This has been great. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you to Todd for being such an amazing guest, and thank you for listening to the Alpha Man podcast today. We also want to extend a thank you to our podcast sponsor, the Society of Technical Analysts. Do check out their brilliant home study course, and you can see more about that at our website, alpha-mind.net. And of course, if you're keen to know more about how Alpha Mind can help you, please do also look up further details of our services on our website, or reach out to us at info@alpha-mind.net. That just leaves us to say thank you, and we wish you the best of luck in the weeks ahead.